Hi there, Dan here. I've recently been rereading the Saxon Stories series by King of Historical Fiction, Bernard Cornwell. I think it's also known as the Warrior Chronicles and maybe the Last Kingdom series since the TV show came out, and probably a bunch of other names if you're used to the US editions. And as it's quite a long series and I'm probably going to do reviews of the individual books, I thought it might be useful to do an explanation of the overall premise. I'm also going to suggest a few other books that anyone who liked the series might also be interested in. So, the Saxon Stories. This is a great series of novels. It is absolutely peak Bernard Cornwell. It tells the story of the creation of the Kingdom of England in the face of endemic warfare between the Danes, they're also called the Norse, the Vikings, the Northmen. They got a bunch of names in the book, and between them and the Saxons, with Alfred the Great and his descendants leading the resistance to the Viking horde. And these events are narrated to us by Uhtred, an anglo-saxon noble and a warrior who was raised by the Danes to become an awesome warrior. And by his own account, he plays a massive part in proceedings. Uhtred is a really engaging character. He's always got a sharp one-liner. He's always on the front line in the battle. He's always the one that comes up with the cunning plan that saves the day. But of course, he's the one telling you the story. So, how much of that should you believe? Ooh. So Uhtred's ancestral lands are usurped by his treacherous uncle Aelfric. So against the backdrop of the larger narrative of the creation of the English kingdom, we also follow Uhtred's efforts to reclaim these lands, and all the time we're wondering whether he's going to side with the Saxons or with the Danes in the building conflict between the two nations. Maybe not nations, peoples, between the two peoples. Now, if you like this series, Bernard Cornwell has written a bunch of other stuff which you'll probably also like, and most of which I think is pretty great. I've read a lot of it. I've not read the Sharp series, which is his longest one, but that's because I'm not really interested in the Napoleonic period. What I would particularly recommend out of his other stuff that I have read is the Warlord trilogy, which is a retelling of the legends of King Arthur, and also the Grail Quest series. I think there's a main trilogy, and then there's two sort of standalone novels, vaguely in the same series. And in those, we follow Thomas Hook or Thomas Hookton. One of those anyway, who is an English longbowman during the 100 Years' War period. So you get the famous battle, you get a Battle of Agincourt in there. I think Crécy and Poitiers should probably both be in there. I can't quite remember. And then there's a side plot where they're searching for the Grail, the Holy Grail. I do also have some other recommendations for anyone who's interested in the Anglo-Saxon period or in the Viking period. And also some recommendations for people who like historical fiction in the style of Bernard Cornwell. So, first person, past tense, fast-paced, action-packed adventure series. So, one book that I've read that fulfills both of them criteria is The Serpent Sword by Matthew Harvey. This is the first book in the Bernicia Chronicles, which is another series of Anglo-Saxon historical adventures. I've got to admit, I've only read the first one of these, this one I'm holding here, but it was really good. It's set a couple of 100 years before the Last Kingdom series. But yeah, highly recommended if you liked that series. And the next one is more, or the next few in fact, are more if you like the Viking side of the series. Again, these are the first person action heavy stuff where you really get inside the head of the main character. Yeah, so the first Viking series that I'd like to recommend is The Whale Road by Robert Lowe. This is the first book in the Oathsworn series, and in fact I've just noticed that it has a recommendation from Bernard Cornwell on the front, so what more recommendation do you need than that? That's a coincidence, isn't it? The next Viking one that I've got is by Giles Christian. In fact, I've got two books by Giles Christian here. The first one is book number 1 in the Raven series, Blood Eye. This is another one that follows a young Saxon, I think he's a Saxon, that gets taken by the Danes, and or Englishman or whatever, that gets taken by the Danes and sort of trained up to become a Viking, much like Uhtred. Very much in the same writing style as Bernard Cornwell. And yeah, Giles Christian is an author that I only discovered the last year or two, and he's really good. And the second book of his that I've got is God of Vengeance. There you go, God of Vengeance, which is a trilogy, the first book in a trilogy that was written as a prequel series to the Raven one that he did. So yeah, if you like that one, then you'll definitely like this one as well. Yeah. Now, the next few novels that I've got to show you are kind of in the same writing style as Bernard Cornwell, but they'll be dealing with different historical periods. So if you've got sort of like a broader interest in history, but you like how Bernard Cornwell writes, then you'll probably like these ones as well. The first one is by another one of my favourite authors, someone who I think is up there with Bernard Cornwell in the upper tier of historical fiction writers, and that is Christian Cameron. And this is the first book in his Killer of Men series, which is set in ancient Greece during the Greco-Persian Wars. It follows Arimnestos as he takes part in all the sort of great historical events of that period. And yeah, this actually I think is probably up there with the Saxon stories as my top 2 historical fiction adventure series. It's a complete series. There are 7 in the series, I think, 6 or 7 anyway. But yeah, definitely worth a read, this one. This would be my top recommendation. The second book I got by Christian Cameron is The Longsword, which is the first in his Chivalry series. It follows a knight during the 100 Years' War, William Gold. His name is William Gold. He's like a mercenary. He does a bit of crusading, and that's about as far as I've got in the series. I've read the first 3 books. I think there are 4 out at the moment, with more intended. I don't know how many in total. But yeah, this has been a really good read so far. If you're interested in the 100 War period, go for it. So the next one I've got is first book in the Outlaw Chronicles by Angus Donald, and that is called Outlaw. And I really like this one because it's got Robin Hood in, and who doesn't like Robin Hood? In fact, this just shows you how much Bernard Cornwell is like the touchstone, the reference point for historical adventure fiction. This book has a sticker on it saying, "As good as Bernard Cornwell or your money back." I don't know if you can even see that, but yeah, as good as Bernard Cornwell or your money back. Well, there you go. So anyway, yeah, this is Robin Hood told from the point of view of one of his merry men. It's a bit of a twist on the Robin Hood legend, which I will let you read it to find out. And the final novel that I've got to recommend you is by James Aitchison. It is Sworn Sword, which is the first book in a series following a Norman knight during the conquest of England by William the Conqueror. This is really nicely written, gritty, fast-paced, action-packed stuff, very much a la Bernard Cornwell. Now, the next one I'm going to recommend is really a must for anyone who's interested in the Anglo-Saxon period, and that is Beowulf by nobody knows who it's by. That's who. Now this is a poem in Old English. It was probably composed in the 8th century. Nobody really knows that either. But yeah, this is the original sort of Anglo-Saxon hero guy. I say Anglo-Saxon, actually, like it's based in Scandinavia, but it's an Anglo-Saxon poem. And Beowulf is like the archetypal hero, goes around fighting monsters, winning treasure, and has like an awesome funeral scene at the end. And the final book that I've got to recommend you is The Ecclesiastical History of the English People by Bede. I bet you weren't expecting that, were you? Now this was written by an Anglo-Saxon monk in the 8th century, and it chronicles the history of the Anglo-Saxon peoples in the island of Britain from the invasion of Julius Caesar, I think, which is like, what's that, 55 BC. From the invasion of Julius Caesar up until the author's present day, so up until the first half of the 8th century. And it is full of, crazy stories about kings and battles and wars and weird anecdotes about saints and bishops and things who got up to all kinds of crazy stuff, according to Bede. And it is definitely worth a read, given that it is basically our main source of information on the period, and pretty much the only one from the horse's mouth. So yeah, I hope that was useful, and look forward to my review of the first book in the Saxon Stories series, which will be coming up pretty soon. So, bye, I suppose.